The blue and red lights lit up my cabin porch like a crime scene. Two officers walked up, followed by a smug woman in a beige suit, pointing at me like I was a wanted criminal. "That's him! He broke in!" she yelled. I was holding my coffee, still in pajamas. Because I live here, I own this cabin. And I wasn't just a property owner. I was the state's senior real estate compliance officer. And she had just called 911 on the wrong guy. The blue and red lights danced across the wooden walls of my cabin, painting shadows that stretched and twisted in the early morning darkness. I stood on my porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as two police officers approached, while a woman in her 50s stood behind them, arms crossed triumphantly. She wore a beige pantsuit that screamed middle management, and her highlighted bob haircut bounced with each emphatic gesture she made toward my cabin. "That's him, officers, the trespasser. I told you he broke in last night," she declared with a voice that could cut glass. "This property has been vacant for months, and suddenly this stranger shows up claiming he owns it. I am the HOA president of Pine Ridge Estates, and I know every single homeowner in this community." The lead officer, a tall man with graying temples, approached me with professional caution. "Sir, we received a call about a burglary in progress at this address. Can you please provide some identification?" I reached into my wallet, pulling out my driver's license, along with another card that I kept tucked behind it. As I handed both to the officer, I noticed his partner shining a flashlight around the porch, checking for signs of forced entry that wouldn't exist. The officer examined my license under his flashlight, then paused when he saw the second card. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked up at me, then back at the card, then over his shoulder at the woman who was now tapping her foot impatiently. "Ma'am," he said, slowly turning to face her, "do you know who this is?" Her smug expression faltered for just a moment. "I don't care who he claims to be. He's trespassing on HOA property without authorization." The officer's tone shifted completely. "Ma'am, this is Daniel Morrison. He's the senior compliance officer for the State Real Estate Commission." The color drained from her face like water from a bathtub. Everything had started so simply. 3 days earlier, I'd received a call from my mother informing me that Uncle Robert had passed away. Along with my grief came the unexpected news that he'd left me his lake cabin in Pine Ridge Estates. I'd visited it once as a teenager, but that was nearly 20 years ago. The lawyer handling the estate had mailed me the keys and deed, assuring me that all property taxes were current and the transfer was complete. Needing a break from the endless stream of property dispute cases crossing my desk in the city, I decided to drive up and spend a night at the cabin. It was meant to be peaceful, a chance to remember my uncle and disconnect from the chaos of regulatory enforcement. The 3-hour drive through winding mountain roads had been therapeutic, and I'd arrived just as the sun was setting behind the pines. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, small but cozy, with knotty pine walls and a stone fireplace that still smelled faintly of old smoke. I brought basic supplies, lit a fire, and settled in with a book and a glass of wine. By 10 p.m., I was asleep in the master bedroom, lulled by the sound of crickets and the distant lapping of lake water. Then came the banging, not gentle knocking, but aggressive pounding that jolted me awake at 7 a.m. I stumbled to the door in yesterday's clothes to find a woman standing on my porch with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd been personally offended by my existence. "Excuse me, but who are you and what are you doing in this property?" she demanded before I could even say good morning. I rubbed my eyes and tried to focus. "I'm Daniel Morrison. This is my cabin. I inherited it from my uncle. And you are?" she huffed with indignation. "I am Linda Garrison, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and I can assure you that no one has authorized any new residents in this community. This cabin has been vacant since Robert Morrison passed, and any occupation requires HOA approval, payment of transfer fees, and a thorough background check."
I literally own this property, I said with barely concealed exhaustion. I have the deed and the keys. My uncle left it to me in his will. She waved her clipboard at me like it was a weapon. That's not how it works here, mister. Pine Ridge Estates has strict covenants and bylaws. You can't just show up and claim residence without going through proper channels. Do you have your HOA application? Have you paid the $500 transfer fee? What about the new resident orientation packet? I leaned against the doorframe, suddenly very aware that I hadn't had coffee yet. Listen, Linda, I appreciate your diligence, but I'm not a new resident. I'm the property owner, spending one night at my own cabin. I don't need HOA approval to sleep in my own bed. Her face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you take that tone with me? I have been president of this HOA for 12 years, and I will not be disrespected by some city person who thinks he can waltz in here and ignore our rules. I'm not ignoring anything, I said calmly. I'm simply exercising my property rights. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need coffee. I started to close the door, but she jammed her foot in the way. This isn't over. You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney, and if I see you here tonight, I'll call the police for trespassing. With that cheerful warning, she stomped off my porch and marched down the gravel driveway. I watched her go, then made a mental note to review Pine Ridge Estates' HOA documents. In my line of work, I'd seen plenty of overzealous board members, but Linda Garrison seemed to be in a league of her own. The rest of the day passed peacefully. I spent time cleaning out some of Uncle Robert's belongings, took a kayak out on the lake, and even met some friendly neighbors who expressed their condolences and welcomed me to the community. None of them mentioned needing HOA approval, though several did roll their eyes when I mentioned my morning visitor. "Oh, you met Linda," said Tom from 2 cabins down. "Yeah, she's dedicated. Tried to fine me once for having the wrong shade of brown on my deck stain. I had to show her the approved color list with the literal paint can to get her to back off." That evening, I grilled some burgers on the deck and watched the sunset paint the lake orange and purple. I was just settling in for another quiet night when I saw the headlights coming up the drive. 2 sets of headlights, actually. The police cars pulled up to my cabin, and I walked out to meet them, still holding my coffee mug from dinner, which brought us to the present moment, with Linda Garrison's smug expression melting away as the officers recognized my name and title. The lead officer handed back my identification and turned to face her fully. "Ma'am, can you explain exactly what crime you're reporting here?" he asked with professional restraint. Linda sputtered for a moment, then found her voice. "He's trespassing. This property requires HOA authorization for occupancy, and he doesn't have it." "But he owns the property," the officer said slowly, as if explaining to a child. "You can't trespass on your own property." "The HOA has rules," she insisted, her voice climbing higher. "He hasn't paid fees or submitted applications, or those are civil
Matters, ma'am, not criminal ones. The second officer interrupted. "You called 911 and reported a burglary in progress. That's a serious allegation." I decided it was time to speak up. "Officers, I'm happy to show you the deed and estate documents if that would help clear this up. Everything is properly filed with the county and all taxes are current." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Morrison," the lead officer said. "We know who you are. My captain actually attended your seminar on property law compliance last spring." He turned back to Linda. "Ma'am, are you aware that filing a false police report is a crime?" Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I didn't file a false report. He's not supposed to be here without HOA approval." "But he's not burglarizing anything," the officer said patiently. "He owns the property. HOA disputes are not police matters unless there's actual criminal activity." I watched as the reality of her situation began to sink in. Linda Garrison, in her zealous pursuit of HOA compliance, had just falsely reported a state official to the police, the very same state official who spent his days investigating property law violations and HOA overreach. "Officers," I said calmly,
I appreciate your response time and professionalism. I'd like to file a formal complaint about this incident. I was awakened from sleep in my own property by police responding to a false burglary report. This is the second time today that Miss Garrison has harassed me about my lawful presence on my own property. The lead officer nodded and pulled out his notebook. We'll need to take statements from both of you. Mr. Morrison, would you like to press charges for filing a false report? Linda's face went from red to white so fast I worried she might faint. You can't be serious. I'm the HOA president. I was protecting our community from its lawful property owners, I asked with a raised eyebrow. The next hour was spent giving statements while Linda grew increasingly frantic. She called her husband, someone she referred to as our HOA attorney, and at least 3 board members. Each call became more desperate as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. As the officers prepared to leave, the lead officer handed me his card. If you need anything for your formal complaint, Mr. Morrison, please let us know. We take false reports very seriously, especially when they're used to harass property owners. He gave Linda a stern look. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you familiarize yourself with actual property law before making any more emergency calls. After the police left, Linda stood in my driveway looking smaller than she had that morning. You won't really file a complaint, will you? She asked with a voice that had lost all its earlier authority. I was just doing my job. Your job is to manage legitimate HOA business, not to harass homeowners or waste emergency resources. I'll be reviewing your HOA documents and bylaws thoroughly. I suggest you do the same. The formal complaint was filed the next morning before I drove back to the city. But that was just the beginning. When I returned to my office, I pulled the file on Pine Ridge Estates. What I found was illuminating. Complaints about overreach, questionable fine structures, and improperly noticed meetings. It seemed Linda Garrison's reign had left quite a paper trail. I scheduled a formal audit of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA for the following month. State law required HOAs to maintain certain standards, follow specific procedures, and respect property rights. From what I was seeing, Pine Ridge had some serious compliance issues. The audit revealed exactly what I expected: improper elections, missing financial disclosures, and a pattern of harassment against homeowners who questioned Linda's authority. The State Real Estate Commission issued a formal notice of violation requiring immediate reforms. But the real blow came 3 weeks later at the emergency HOA meeting. Word had spread about Linda's false police report and the subsequent state investigation. Homeowners who had suffered under her tyrannical rule for years finally had their chance to speak up. The vote to remove her from the board was unanimous, except for one vote, hers. I attended that meeting as both a homeowner and a state official. Watching Linda Garrison stand at the podium, gavel in hand, as the secretary read the vote tally was almost painful. Her 12-year reign of terror over Pine Ridge Estates ended, not with a bang, but with a whimper. "This is illegal," she shouted as the new interim president asked her to step down. "You can't do this. I've given my life to this community." "The vote has been counted, Linda. Tom, my neighbor with the deck stain issue, it's time to step aside." Security had to escort her out as she continued protesting. The last I saw of her that night, she was standing in the parking lot, still clutching her clipboard, looking lost without her presidential authority. The false report charge eventually resulted in a $5,000 fine and 200 hours of community service. The HOA's insurance company, faced with potential liability for her actions, refused to cover her legal fees. I heard through the grapevine that she had to take out a second mortgage to pay her attorney. But the true justice came 6 months later when I was assigned to create new state guidelines for HOA governance. The Morrison Protocols, as they became known, specifically addressed the abuse of power by board members and established clear protections for property owners. Linda Garrison's harassment had inadvertently led to stronger protections for homeowners across the state. Now, whenever I visit the cabin, I see Linda occasionally. She lives 3 streets over and still walks her Pomeranian past my property twice a day, but she never makes eye contact, never stops to chat, and definitely never mentions HOA business. The new board president, Tom, runs things with a much lighter touch, focusing on actual community improvements rather than power trips. Last week, I received a notice about the annual HOA compliance review. As the state official assigned to oversee Pine Ridge Estate's adherence to the new protocols, I get to ensure they're following every rule to the letter. The irony isn't lost on me or on Linda, who I'm told turns pale whenever my name comes up at meetings. I sleep very well at the cabin these days, knowing that the woman who called 911 on me for sleeping in my own bed now lives in fear of her next HOA compliance review. The $5,000 fine she paid hurt, but watching her face when she realizes I'll be overseeing her former kingdom for the foreseeable future, that's priceless.
What would you have done if an HOA president called the cops on you for sleeping in your own home? Would you fight back legally or just move out quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA, tell your story below. You might be featured in our next episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that bell so you never miss another wild HOA takedown. More jaw-dropping stories coming soon.